Hi, my name is Amanda Craig, and this is an analysis of climate change on the homeless population focused on coastal Florida with a gendered lens. Fair warning, there are mentions of rape and assault in this presentation. Given their condition, homeless people struggle significantly as it is. The addition of climate change makes their situation inextricably worse, especially in coastal Florida because that is the front lines of climate change. On top of this, homeless women face further issues as well as gender-based violence and assault. To begin, coastal Florida is on the front lines of climate change. This has many implications for Florida on a variety of levels. Fitzory and Fial focus on sea level rise, which Florida is especially susceptible to. They predict that much of Florida's coastlines will be underwater within 100 years, and some strategies to cope with this are unable to protect the existing waterfront property, including homes, businesses, and industrial sites. This will have many negative impacts on Florida's economy as there is much reliance on the beaches for tourism, and that's excluding the price to repair and rebuild after natural disasters. This article from The Guardian shows just how costly it is to combat some of these issues as well, seen here circled in red, with total prices ending up in billions of dollars. Additionally, this will cause much harm to the plethora of ecosystems Florida holds, having the potential to destroy precious wildlife and habitats. This harms us as people in turn because that wildlife helps protect us, like how mangroves break up hurricanes, which are amplifying due to climate change. Dr. Mosblek, with a PhD in ecology, will give some insight to the climate change in Florida, as well as give you her professional opinion on leadership in Florida and how the state government is handling climate change.
I think Florida is going to face a lot of potential impacts from, devastating sea level rise and flooding to the potential impact, stronger storms and hurricanes, the heat waves. We are looking at, unfortunately, a lot of the impacts are going to be hitting our state. I think with the previous administration under Governor Rick Scott, there was much more denial and, burying your head in the sand that this is not happening. I think the problem is, again, that lack of leadership at the state level. We don't have a coordinated effort where everyone is trying to move towards this more prepared, kind of adapted state.
Even non-environmental civilians are noticing differences. These quotes shown on screen are from a Florida resident of over 30 years. Clearly, things have been changing. The reason I find for these issues is because the society we live in does not easily allow for homeless people to get back on their feet, and the addition of climate change makes it that much more of a struggle. The government, who has the power to potentially help this situation, does virtually nothing while people get displaced from their homes due to natural disasters or they have a heat stroke because they have no escape from the climbing temperatures. Homeless coastal Floridians feel these effects the worst because they experience all of these issues that are due to climate change. A potential dualism I could see is that humans cause this extent of climate change, so why fight the consequences? However, this does not mean that homeless people should continue to suffer while people of means can afford to relocate or be comfortable while these things are going on. As for climate change on a macro scale, Julia Mason gave her TED Talk, an ecofeminist perspective, where she brought up that in France in 2003 there were extreme heat waves, and in that same year women had a higher mortality rate than men. Additionally, throughout the Millennium Goals documentary, the California droughts with Noemi and the desertification with Sorvin are discussed continuously. However, this evidence misses the connection between weather and climate, implies any little change in weather is tied to climate change, and assumes that anyone suffering from climate change is in poverty. Focusing back on the angle of homeless people, climate change disproportionately affects homeless people. I'll let Valeria Hansen tell you about her experiences with the Florida heat when she was homeless.
In general, how did the weather affect your homelessness? Like,
oh my God, it was hot.
Really?
It was so hot. I remember that. I was sweaty all the time. I can distinctly remember that. Yeah, I was just sweaty all the time, and so I was tired all the time, and so my parents were also tired all the time. And we were just generally, exhausted. You woke up exhausted. Yeah, and there were very few moments of, reprieve because, Florida, even, going into fall, Florida nights can be also pretty hot. So it felt like there really wasn't much of a reprieve. And, I did have, a couple of heat strokes. I do remember that. That was a panicky moment for my parents. Yeah, I did. And I'm sure my parents did too. I just maybe didn't notice.
Raman and Savoboda reinforced this by showing how homeless conditions can be immunocompromising, which increase the vulnerability of the homeless to infectious diseases. The Climate Reality Project even brings up that natural disasters are happening more often and with more intensity. Events like floods, heat waves, hurricanes, wildfires, and droughts can level homes and even entire communities. A president's message shows how sudden disaster can strike, and just as emotionally tolling it can be as well. All of this, coupled with what Florida faces, such as sea level rise, does not bode well for homeless people who do not have homes to find respite from heat or shelter from floods. Because homeless people have nowhere to go during storms or general weather events such as summer heat, they are prone to heat strokes and heat stress. Additionally, in urban areas with large amounts of smog and air pollution, respiratory issues are more prominent in homeless people because they literally live outside and have no choice but to exist in the pollution. On top of this, they have little to no access to health care outside of pro bono work, so these health conditions go untreated more or less for life. This has extreme implications because even simple, easily treatable conditions can spiral and become lethal. As for a gender lens on the health side, homeless women could have additional health impacts relating to this, especially with gender-based violence, which I will get to later, such as rape and assault. Furthermore, homeless people have significantly more mental illnesses, including those of women who have been sexually assaulted and abused, but also addicts and recovering addicts. While there are some centers for women that are homeless and or suffer from these abuses, there are still shelters just for men, and the actual assault and abuses are still occurring, but more on this later. All of this in conglomeration with climate change effects does not bode well for homeless people, especially since the government in coastal Florida does not have great infrastructure for any of these issues. Rahman and Svoboda's research shows that self-reported rates of lung diseases such as asthma, chronic bronchitis, and emphysema in the homeless are double that of the general population, and these conditions are often poorly controlled, but that is assuming those self-reporting are truthful. Nicole Detraz brings up that while humans are shielded from some of these environmental changes due to technology and other factors, we are fundamentally dependent on ecosystem services to keep our communities alive, but this implies that everyone has access to technology to protect them from negative environmental aspects, which is not always true for people that are homeless. To recap, Florida suffers from the brunt of effects of climate change. Pairing this with the existing health of homeless people on top of how they are affected by climate change so far shows that homeless people in coastal Florida experience quite the negative impacts. With this, my last point brings in the overall gendered aspect. Homeless women experience gender-based violence and other aggressions. Nursing.usc.edu claims that domestic and sexual violence are the leading causes of homelessness among women. Additionally, women affected by homelessness are also more likely to have a mental illness. Hagen adds on that women had a much greater incidence of eviction and domestic violence as factors contributing to homelessness than did men. He makes the conclusion that the relationships between gender and eviction and domestic violence as reasons for homelessness were statistically significant. I'll let Valeria tell you about her experience with this.
I mean, I think it was because we were women, and it doesn't hurt when you catch a woman in a vulnerable position. My mom experienced it all the time. So we're Hispanic, so we would get a lot of the spicy comments. You're so hot. Do you like heat? Like things like that. She was a woman in her 30s, and I was 14, 15, and getting like groped on the bus. And it's one of those things that you get really upset by, but at the same time, like, I mean, when that first like thing happened, I just sat there and I cried because, you know, your response when it happens to someone else is, I'm going to fight for you. Screw that. You know, I'm going to stand up for you. You know, you should stand up for yourself. But in the moment when it happened, I shut down.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was young and I didn't really know how to handle it.
Right.
No one ever puts you through a class of, you know, this is what you do when you're sexually harassed.
And you don't know if they're going to get violent either.
Yeah, like that's also like a big fear of mine because in my mind, I've had moments where I didn't do that and I got followed off the bus. And then, you know, you kind of start to build resentment because you're like, you know, if we had a home, we would be home right now. It definitely happened.
In our interview, Valeria pointed out that even though shelters are supposed to be safe, they can be quite dangerous for women.
And I mean, it was also part of the reason why my mom didn't want to go to an actual homeless shelter because she was really scared because, you know, she would ask around and other people would be like, if you have a daughter, don't go. Like, other homeless people would be like, if you have a daughter, don't go. Protect your daughter, because of the likelihood of that happening. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of shelters, at least when I was younger, there wasn't a lot of, like, rules and regulation. And, like, it was really important, especially to my mom, I think, to have agency, because she hates handouts, even now. She hated feeling pitied. She was just terrified of bringing me there because she had heard stories from other women who were like, don't go. And, you know, I think women tend to build a community with each other very quickly and look out for them, especially when, you know, you're in a position where you're vulnerable.
This puts another, more specific lens on homelessness and its relation to the environment. This is an issue because, as discussed previously, homeless people and women already face so many challenges. The fact that a woman could leave an abusive relationship or situation only to end up homeless and face the same abuse again is horrendous. The majority of homeless women are homeless because they are facing domestic violence and had to get out, whereas men were mainly homeless because of eviction from an addiction or something relating to it. I think this dualism plays a role and shows another aspect of oppression of women because as much as they might try to escape something, they just can't get out entirely, even though their life depends on it. Not to mention the psychological effects that can come from rape and abuse is astronomical, but mental health is already stigmatized in the U.S., and healthcare is not always accessible, so survivors of gender-based violence have little resources. On top of this, since homeless women do not have healthcare, they cannot get tested for potential STDs, STIs that can come from said violence, nor can they get checkups on reproductive systems or mammograms and such. However, men have similar issues in this way, but there are more ways for women to develop these issues. Lastly, if someone were to be impregnated as a result of gender-based violence, there are no resources for that person either, especially in areas where Planned Parenthoods have been defunded or shut down. So, to tie this all together, the coasts of Florida are facing many, many devastating impacts from climate change. People who are homeless in Florida face these impacts on top of what they already have to deal with. Homeless women in Florida have this additional factor that make it that much more of a struggle to survive. However, I believe there is a way to help solve the issues that is not fully dismantling sexism and systems of oppression. The study from Reed showed that women suffer greatly from gender-based violence in numerous and various ways, but they can be helped in the form of interventions and rehabilitation type programs. GBV is a huge effect and cause of women's homelessness. However, with the aid of these specialized programs, significant improvement in physical and mental health is shown. With the proper infrastructure and the implementation of these programs, a significant amount of help can be given to people who have layers on layers of oppression. Additionally, electing officials to office who do not deny science and are willing to combat climate change can alleviate so many other issues as discussed here, especially in Florida. Lastly, by taking what you learned here and teaching others, you can make a difference in the world. You can help remove these layers of oppression that homeless people face. If I've inspired you to do something today, you can help some different areas of homeless people in Florida here with these resources, and you can check out these resources on the right to try to be more sustainable. Scan the QR codes for various resources in each subject or find the links below. If anything, I hope you learned something relevant, and maybe you can pass on this information to be the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you.